Oh yeah, please, I'm happy to do that. Well, thank you, Roberto, for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you this afternoon and to, as you celebrate your 170th year. B'nai B'rith is not only the oldest continually operating Jewish service organization in the world, it's perhaps also one of the first leading human rights organizations as well. I really welcome the opportunity to speak here today. I've worked on human rights and religious freedom issues for many, many years, mostly outside of government, as Roberto said, and I've seen firsthand and admired the invaluable work that you do. I was just saying to Roberto, I worked in the late 1970s and early 80s on human rights issues in Argentina, and one of my closest partners was a man named Warren Rosenthal who worked with B'nai B'rith. He was so involved with the Jewish community there and in the broader human rights area. Sadly, more than a century and a half after the founding of your organization, the scourge of anti-Semitism persists, and in some respects it may be worsening. President Obama and Secretary Clinton have committed this administration to confronting and combating anti-Semitism and other forms of religious, racial, and ethnic intolerance and discrimination. As Secretary Clinton said when she recently spoke at the Holocaust Museum, and I'm quoting here, "We must remain vigilant against those deniers and against anti-Semitism, because when heads of state and religious leaders deny the Holocaust from their bully pulpits, we cannot let their lies go unanswered." When we hear Holocaust glorification and public calls to, quote, "finish the job," we need to make clear that violence and bigotry will not be tolerated. And yes, she said, when criticism of Israeli government policies crosses over into demonization of Israel and Jews, we must push back. The bureau I lead is responsible for translating that call to arms into action by shaping and integrating U.S. policies to combat anti-Semitism around the world into vigorous American diplomacy. We also work to amplify and provide support for foreign individuals and groups who lead the fight to expose and challenge anti-Semitism in their own societies. Over the last 3 years, we've been very fortunate to have Hannah Rosenthal lead the charge for us on these issues as the Obama administration's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. I know Hannah's been here to speak to you the last 2 years, and I'm sure those of you who've seen her will share my view that she is one of the most passionate, effective, and articulate of advocates. The child of Holocaust survivors, she has traveled around the world urging governments to address anti-Semitism. She led a delegation of imams to Dhaka. She went to the Vatican. And this summer she went to the Olympics, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. At the same time, Hannah has also generated greater attention within our government to the struggle against anti-Semitism. Next month, Hannah's heading back home to Wisconsin, where she will become the director of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. We're going to miss her greatly, but our efforts to combat anti-Semitism will carry on, our commitment undiminished. Like Hannah, members of my family in Hungary perished in the Holocaust, so these issues have a special personal resonance to me. It's deeply disturbing to read the reports of anti-Semitism coming from around the world. We are all too familiar with reports of the desecration of cemeteries, defacing property, the hateful graffiti on the walls of Jewish neighborhoods, and the poisonous rhetoric that permeates official news outlets and social media throughout the Middle East. Even in 2012, there are still accusations of blood libel and places where schools teach the protocols of the Elders of Zion as fact. These incidents, unfortunately, are not relegated to one part of our globe. In Iran, President Ahmadinejad refers to the Holocaust as a lie and to the Jewish state as a tumor. He is referred to, quote, European assertion that Hitler killed innocent Jews in furnaces and says, "We don't accept that claim." The Obama administration has consistently condemned these outrageous statements, as well as those by other Iranian leaders, and we will continue to do so. We were also pleased that UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, during his recent trip to Tehran, was outspoken on many of the issues we all care about. In Venezuela, we have seen numerous anti-Semitic statements in official media and by President Chavez himself. Last year, Jewish community leaders filed a formal protest with the Prosecutor General's office over the incitement to hate contained in an April 4th broadcast on the government-owned Radio del Sur, whose host promoted the protocols of the Elders of Zion as, quote, must read. The host was switched, but she continued to broadcast on other state-owned media. Last year, President Chavez, in a letter to the UN Secretary General, criticized Israel for committing genocide and ethnic cleansing against Palestinians, and he called Zionism racism. In a range of Middle Eastern countries, editorial cartoons and articles were published depicting Jews as demonic figures, comparing Israeli leaders to Nazis, and denying or glorifying the Holocaust. And in Hungary, radical political groups like the Jobbik Party in parliament use anti-Semitic rhetoric to play on fears of economic uncertainty. One of its leaders recently resigned following internal pressure after it was discovered that he had Jewish heritage. Unfortunately, you will find many other examples in both the State Department's annual Human Rights Report and our report on international religious freedom. I encourage you to take another look at these reports, which we've streamlined and made searchable at www.humanrights.gov. But as you know, monitoring and reporting anti-Semitism is only a first step. Under Hannah's leadership, we have begun a major training initiative for Foreign Service officers in the State Department to teach them not only how to monitor, but also how to respond appropriately to various forms of anti-Semitism. And we're seeing that many countries are now doing the right thing, challenging anti-Semitism and other forms of racial, religious, and ethnic hatred. Most recently, for example, I was pleased to see that Austria's president publicly condemned a politician for posting on his Facebook page a cartoon widely perceived to be anti-Semitic. According to news reports, the president had 2 words to say about efforts to rekindle that country's Nazi history: no way. That is responsible leadership, and I encourage others around the world to follow suit. Those who turn a blind eye to escalating hatreds undermine the stability of their own societies. Conversely, government figures and religious leaders who denounce any and every form of hate and work together to combat it build a foundation for a more peaceful and prosperous society in which all citizens can contribute. Under Secretary Clinton, the United States has made it a priority to support non-governmental groups, which are indispensable to progress all over the world. She calls civil society one of the 3 legs of a stool, the other 2 being government and business. Civil society groups, often not Jewish ones, are at the forefront of efforts to combat anti-Semitism, as well as other forms of hatred. In difficult places, we help amplify these voices. These frontline activists put themselves at risk through their advocacy, and when they get in trouble, as they often do, we seek to provide a lifeline of protection to them. So the first thing we're doing to combat anti-Semitism is partnering with civil society. Second, we're focusing greater attention on young people around the world because we know that their values and opinions are being shaped at an early age. We scrutinize the curriculum they're taught and the textbooks they read. And so we know that in 2012, there are children who are taught hatred in school. We need to redouble our efforts to challenge schools that inculcate hate and glorify violence and those who fund them. Third, our government is providing training to a wide range of foreign law enforcement agencies, Part of that training focuses on crimes committed against vulnerable populations, including countries where there are embattled Jewish communities. Fourth, we are ramping up our cultural and educational exchanges to showcase what civil society groups in this country are doing to confront racism, discrimination, stereotyping, and other forms of hate, and how they've drawn successful initiatives from other countries. And fifth, we are trying to appeal to the idealism of young people and of many faiths who the world they'll live in to be less blighted by hate. As many of you know, 2 years ago, Hannah and Farah Pandit, who was appointed in 2009 as the State Department's first representative to the Muslim communities, launched a virtual campaign on Facebook to ask young people from around the world to give an hour of their time to serve someone who doesn't look like them, live like them, or believe as they do. That campaign is now called 2012 Hours Against Hate, and it has generated an amazing outpouring, the generosity of time and spirit. Young people don't give money, but they do have time, and they have given their time. Hannah often says that the goal is for young people to walk a mile in another person's shoes. This summer, the London Olympics chose 2012 Hours Against Hate as its tolerance initiative, and corporations led by the athletic company SoFit established an app that actually lets people track their walking miles to fight hatred, and it connects them to people in other countries who are walking with them at the same time. Tens of thousands of people have already logged on to Hours Against Hate and the Walk a Mile app. These people forge deeper connections with their own communities, and they connect with others around the world who are also inspired to work against hate. But despite these and many other efforts, we all know that anti-Semitism has not been vanquished. In many places, it's a harbinger of an escalation in extremist hate and violence, a leading indicator of social strife. Where such hatred is born of ignorance, we must teach and inspire. We must show a better way forward. Where such hatred is fomented by political ambition, we must challenge it both diplomatically and politically. The Obama administration is committed to meeting these challenges, but we can't do it alone. Organizations like the B'nai B'rith have an essential role to play, and we are proud to be your partner. We must brace ourselves for a long struggle. The fight against anti-Semitism is a marathon, not a sprint. In that spirit, let us work together and renew our commitment to Tikkun Olam, to heal this world and pursue justice and freedom everywhere. Thank you. I'm glad to take some questions, so please. And please, if you'll identify yourself, that'd be great.
I'm Margaret Goldberger from Nassau County, Long Island, New York. Having experienced as a child anti-Semitism, persecution in Nazi Germany, I'm more than aware of the fact that you need friends in times of need. And to that extent, and I'd like your opinion of this kind of situation, we have a program in Long Island that dates back 31 years, where we have established a relationship with the Social Justice Commission of the Sons of Italy. And in my opinion, and I hope that you agree, it is important to make friends whom you can call upon in times of bias, in times of need. So I'd like your opinion about that. Thank you.
I agree wholeheartedly, and one of the things, both in my experience in government, but previously working in the non-governmental world, I realized the importance of coalitions, of people working not only for their own community, but crossing over. That's part of the idea of the Hours Against Hate that I described. So I very much applaud what you're doing in Nassau County, and I think it reinforces the essential truth that we can't do this alone. We need allies, we need to reach out to others, but there are willing allies. People recognize the importance of fighting all kinds of discrimination, and we should also join with other communities in fighting the discrimination that they face.
3 years ago, an American, My name is Art Evan from New Jersey. Okay, so 3 years ago, an American development worker, Alan Gross, went to Cuba. You're familiar with it?
I am very.
Okay, so in today's New York Times, Wall Street Journal, they have a story about him, and he helped the Cuban Jewish community to connect to the internet. And for that, he was accused of being a spy. There was a sham trial. He was sentenced to 15 years. I would like to know what the Obama administration is doing to free him. According to the newspaper, they're permitting humanitarian aid to go from Miami to Havana, including 32-inch color television, flat screen panels. I mean, I don't understand why there isn't some kind of boycott on this.
I'm glad you raised the case of Alan Gross. It's one that we are deeply concerned about, that we've worked very hard on. As you know, we have a very difficult relationship with the Cuban government, have for a long time. I've worked on Cuban issues for 25 years. I've been in Cuba twice, visited the prison. I know how much there's a systematic violation of human rights there. The Alan Gross case is one of a range of things we've raised. It's been a very high priority. It is an issue where I'm still hopeful we can get progress, but the Cuban government has no doubt the concern we have about that. We've also raised the case with European governments, Latin American governments, and tried to get an echo of our expressions of concern. The fact that we have some very modest programs for humanitarian assistance is a reflection that the Cuban American community here seeks to provide help and support to their relatives who are living in impoverished conditions in Cuba. That in no way diminishes our commitment to free Alan Gross. We will continue to work on it.
Mr. Undersecretary, my name is Irving Silver. I'm from Mobile, Alabama, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Geneva Center for Human Rights and Public Policy. We salute you for your dedication and your career in defending human rights all over the world. My question is relevant to many of us in this room. Every year go to Geneva to the United Nations Human Rights Council meeting, and many of us feel like Don Quixote. And each year we encounter, even in recent years, the impulse of the Committee on Human Rights to become irrelevant, and it continues to be hostage to the Organization of Islamic States. What do you foresee in the reasonable future? Should we still, as the United States, be engaged with the committee?
Thank you for the question. As you know, in the spring of 2009, we made the decision to run for election to the Human Rights Council, which is a reconstituted version of something that used to be called the Human Rights Commission. We did so with our eyes open. We knew that it was a flawed institution. We knew that in particular, the issue you raised, there are multiple resolutions against Israel. There's a permanent agenda item, item 7, that's only about Israel. It's the only country that has its own agenda item. We've been consistently critical of that disproportionate and unfair attention to Israel, and will continue to be so. I think, by the way, I should say I was 5 days on the job when I went to Geneva with respect to the Goldstone report. And my job, and I was very comfortable doing it, was to say, again, there's another country in the world that has a 500-page report of the likes of what the Goldstone report said. There are issues relating to the cast lead operation in Gaza, but the way the UN deals with these issues is completely out of kilter. We will continue to raise our concerns. I have probably spoken to 30 governments, including a lot of our Western European allies, about the essential need for the Human Rights Council to reform itself and to be credible. It needs to readjust the way it deals with the issues of Israel and Palestinians. We say it all the time, we'll continue to say it, I believe we're making progress in a broader sense in moving the agenda of the Human Rights Council away from where it was. But when we started, there were 15 things I would have said are in need of enormous overhaul. Maybe we've dealt with 5 or 6 of those things effectively. For example, there was a resolution from the OIC on defamation of religion. Long-standing resolution which basically said you cannot defame a single religion, Islam, and if you do so, the UN will condemn you. We said no, there's a notion of free speech here. Obviously, if there are issues of hate, if there are things that would lead to violence, those things need to be dealt with. But let's do it in an affirmative way, not in a way that divides the world. We've succeeded at that. We've succeeded in getting country resolutions on Syria, on Iran, on Libya before the change of government there. So we've got a resolution now on free expression, another on free association. So there are a range of places where we have made progress. The issue you raised continues to be one of the things, perhaps the thing that to me is in the greatest need of attention and change. We will continue to raise it. I raise it every time I'm in Geneva. I'll be in Geneva in 10 days, and this is part of my agenda, to go to the British and the French and the Dutch and others and say, the Human Rights Council will not have credibility if it continues to have 5 resolutions about a single country.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephen Stern from Annapolis, Maryland. My question is, with all these great things that you're pointing out, the disproportionate attention, for example, that Israel gets at the UN, is all very, I think what it's saying, without, I don't hear the phrase being said, is it's a form of anti-Semitism, is what we're witnessing. And then also, related to that, is oftentimes, this is something that our organization addresses very regularly, attacks on Israel are veiled, or not so veiled, forms of anti-Semitism as well. And I realize our government often and consistently speaks out in Israel's ability to defend itself. But what about calling out these governments and these individuals and calling it what it is in terms of anti-Semitism? Is this happening and I just don't know it? Or is there a policy reason why it's not being used in that phrase? Or are there other subtleties I'm not appreciating in that regard?
No, it's a fair question. You know, one of the things we now do, both in the Human Rights Report and in the Report on International Religious Freedom, is very explicitly go to each of our embassies, 190 whatever, around the world, and ask them to report on anti-Semitism. And we've had some interesting discussions internally about what do we mean by that, how do we interpret it, and what we've said essentially is that while criticism of Israel or its policies is not inherently anti-Semitic, when criticisms disparage Jews or demonize them, collectively or individually, that crosses the line. And so we've been really pressing our embassies to report back, and I think if you go to humanrights.gov, you will be able to see, and you can pull these out. It's now digitized, so you could actually just look up anti-Semitism and pull up the reports from across the world. We're doing more and more reporting. And as I said in my comments, that's the first step. The next step is to make sure that diplomats who maybe aren't familiar with this or have some uncertainty about it begin to use this as part of their diplomatic talking points and raise it with the governments in the countries where they serve. We now do human rights training at the Foreign Service Institute a few miles from here. We have Hannah Rosenthal or somebody from our office talking about anti-Semitism. This is a process of educating our own government and our own foreign service officers and saying, even in places, let's say in the Middle East or in Europe, where there's sensitivities about this, it's critical as the United States that we stand up and say, these are anti-Semitic actions, these are anti-Semitic comments, and as a government, we object to that.
Thank you.
Mr. Posner, thank you very much. Let me ask you.